Today, we're going to tackle a huge topic, the incredible transformation of Iran. We're talking about a country that was completely reshaped by the 1979 Islamic Revolution. We're going to look at the massive shifts in culture, in rights, and in power that took the nation from a Western-style monarchy to the conservative Islamic Republic we know today. You know, this one phrase really says it all. It perfectly captures the image of Iran before the revolution. It was on this fast track of westernization, which makes the country that came after 1979 seem like a whole different world. And that journey, from one extreme to the other, is really the heart of this story.
To get it, you really have to understand these two opposing forces. On one side, you had the Shah's White Revolution, which was this aggressive, top-down push to make Iran more modern, more secular, kind of like a European country. But a lot of people felt it was disconnected from their values, which fueled this huge backlash, the Islamic Revolution. And that was all about building a new society based on conservative religious principles.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll dive into those huge shifts in culture and women's rights. Then, we're going to explore some really surprising paradoxes in education and the economy. And finally, we'll unpack the unique power structure in Iran today and look at what might be next.
All right, let's jump right in with the most visible changes, the things that affect everyday life, social freedoms, and especially the status of women. This is truly a tale of two completely different eras.
You see, under the Shah's whole westernization project, women were actually making some pretty big legal gains. They got the right to vote in '63, the family law was updated, giving them more say in a marriage, and, really importantly, the minimum age to get married was raised to 18. Women were becoming way more visible and active in society.
But after the Islamic Revolution, the pendulum just swung completely in the other direction. The hijab became mandatory. Those family protection laws, gone. The marriage age was lowered again. The state brought in its interpretation of Sharia law, or Islamic religious law, which meant a woman's testimony in court was suddenly worth half of a man's, and a ton of new restrictions were placed on them in public life.
And this number, it points to a really tragic reality. Back in 2019, a state-run newspaper reported that Iran records between 375 and 450 honor killings every single year. It's a sobering statistic for sure, and it really highlights the dangers women can face in a system that often just doesn't protect them.
Now for our next section, we get into some incredible paradoxes. Because, you know, while all those social freedoms were being rolled back, there was some undeniable progress in other really key areas, especially when you look at education and the economy.
So, before the revolution, literacy was a massive problem. The overall rate was barely 36%, but look at the gap between men and women. Over 60% of women couldn't read or write. The Shah's big push for secular education just wasn't reaching a huge chunk of the population, especially out in the countryside.
Now, check this out. The change after the revolution is, honestly, it's staggering. By 2016, the overall literacy rate had shot up to 86%. The new government went on a massive campaign to expand education, especially in rural areas. And that gender gap, it shrank like crazy. On paper, this is one of the Islamic Republic's biggest success stories.
And here it is, this is the biggest paradox of them all. While women's legal rights were being taken away, their access to higher education just exploded. Back in the 70s, only 4% of university students were women. Today, women make up over 60% of university students. So think about that. You have a highly educated female population living under a system that legally restricts them in so many ways.
The economy tells a pretty similar story of contradictions. Before 1979, Iran was basically all about oil. It was over 90% of the GDP. But today, the economy is way more diversified. Oil is only about 5%. Services, industry, agriculture, that's the bulk of it now.
But, and this is a huge but, even with that diversification, the economic reality for the average person has been brutal. Just look at the currency. In 1978, one US dollar was worth about 71 rials. By 2022, it was over 42,000. Now, sanctions definitely play a role, but a lot of experts also point to how the state dominates the economy, which stifles growth and scares off investment.
So, what kind of political system is behind all these changes? In our final section, we're going to look at Iran's unique structure of power and the forces that are shaping its unwritten future. At the very, very top is the supreme leader. And we're not talking about a president or a prime minister here. This is an all-powerful figure with absolute authority. They control every major lever of power, The military, the courts, foreign policy, the economy, they have the final say on, well, everything.
This chart shows you kind of how that power trickles down. So Iran does have elected officials, like a president and a parliament. But they're underneath unelected bodies. The supreme leader picks the Guardian Council, and that council can veto laws, and, this is the crucial part, they decide who is even allowed to run for office in the first place. So yeah, the democratic process is ultimately controlled from the top.
But underneath this rigid structure, a powerful tension is building. Remember that highly educated population we talked about, especially the women, who are now the majority of university students? Well, they've grown up connected to the world through the internet. They see what's out there, and they're pushing the boundaries, demanding more social and personal freedom. And that creates a direct clash with the state's authority, a clash we've seen explode into massive, nationwide protests.
And that brings us to our final and most important question. Iran was defined by one revolution back in 1979. Now, with a highly educated, globally connected generation rubbing up against a conservative regime, the tension is just undeniable. So the only question that's left is this: what will Iran's next revolution look like?